Hi friends, welcome. This is video number 2 in a series from my recent trip to Hawaii. This will be some photos from my experience on the Big Island in Hawaii, and particularly some photos I took at a place called Kailua Bay, which is a town that's a bay. So why don't we go lay by the bay?
I just may. What do you say?
I love bays, ports, harbors, anything that has to do with a town next to the water that has some character. It makes me very happy. I find them to be very dynamic, and this was no exception. So first I want to give you a quick lay of the land of this town. We have a marketplace area. We have a lovely stone wall. Editing James here. Here's the wall that I was referring to. This person wasn't there when I was there. These weren't there either. These are for an Ironman competition. That would have been exciting to photograph. We have a concrete docking and fishing area. We have a beach that I did not spend almost any time on. And then we have, of course, the water. Now I tend to enjoy smaller, lively towns over a metropolis if I get the chance. A good example of this is a place called Annapolis, which I visited in the past. Beautiful location, very unique, a lot of character. This is very similar to that. Annapolis also had water and sailboats. Sailboats had a lot. But if we jump into our first photo of the day, we see a guy riding down the road on a skateboard. He is in mid-stroke, and we have a car also coming in his direction, coming in from the right side of the frame with a surfboard on top. I love the juxtaposition between the two types of boards that you will find most commonly on the Hawaiian Islands, and that is a skateboard and a surfboard. You also get the sense that they're both moving from the right side to the left side of the frame. You get the sense that the guy's obviously going somewhere and then the car is going somewhere. Maybe they're taking the surfboard somewhere to surf on top of it. I enjoy the straight yellow lines on the bottom, and I feel like I was able to pack a lot of context into a very tight scene and also put it into a square, which is always a win. Pleasing landscape in the background as well. We have some boats. The image is the image is broken almost perfectly in half, which I like, and overall the composition feels very lively. In this next photo, we have a technique that I mentioned in the previous video where I like to focus past something or someone in the foreground onto something or someone in the background to make a more dynamic photo. Now, obviously, having this guy in the frame walking by is another layer of context to add to the intrigue of the photo, but also there's a pleasing sense of depth here. I love using a bustling bay as my background. I find it's a great way to create a banger, as the youth say. There's a warm and cool contrast happening here, which is quite nice, all the way down to the kayak and the kayakers wearing warm tones against the cool tones of the water. And also, the scene feels balanced in terms of the boat in the background on the left, and then whatever that is on the right, some sort of barge or something. If that was not there on the right, the photo would feel a little lopsided, so I think it worked out well here. In this one, I capture a little friendship moment. We have two girls eating lunch together. We have a boat perfectly centered in between the two of them, and it would have been nice if I did not have that boat on the right in there, but alas, I don't Photoshop. You can. I don't. We have another angle of the same scene, and you can see that it actually creates a very different scene because of the shifting in angle. We have lots of color here. One of the things I did here was put the subjects on the least busy part of the background, which is the water, and then gave them some headroom. So we have a nice pleasing sense of depth here from the layering that I utilized. One method that you can approach a street photo with is the how much can I squeeze into a frame and still make it feel organized and pleasing method, and I think that's what we have going on here. In this next one, we have a bit of a wider shot. We have a lot of surrounding scene and then a subject walking off to the right side of the frame. I think the lighting on her, the warmth of it, and also how bright it is really helps this photo along. I put her on the right third. It's a bit, of an experimental type of scene, but it's almost perfectly on the right third. One thing to take note of is, once again, I put her head, the most important part of her in terms of where the focus is, I put that over the water once again with a little bit of headroom so that she's not touching that, the land. Also, if she was on the left, she would have been in that bunch of palm trees. So you see how it played out here versus how it could have played out. Next, we have a couple of photos that I took in an alleyway. And in this alleyway, there were shops and there was some clothing that people could buy. I really enjoyed this alleyway and actually returned to it later. You'll see that in a minute. I took this photo and this photo. Okay, sorry, my mic recording contraption to my left here died. Also, I had a meeting. But we're back. Where were we? Ah, yes, the alley. So this level of subframing is fun to me, and we have this sort of dark tunnel effect happening. I decided to put the open sign on the right-hand side, which signifies that this is a marketplace type atmosphere. I would have loved to have come back with a more exciting subject from this location. There's a lot of opportunity in this spot, I can tell. So my plan is every weekend I'm going to fly 15 hours there and then fly 15 hours back. Maybe, one day I'll change it up, take a canoe once I get to the West Coast, so that I can squeeze this lemon for everything that it's worth. And then I got a couple of shots of this steeple, which was in town. The lighting is obviously a big deal for this photo. I grabbed this photo. I did a black and white, you see, and I think it really worked well for this subject matter. And then I grabbed this one where the steeple is in the frame, but in the foreground, we have some activity going on. We had some girls in the water tossing this ball back and forth. I can imagine that this sport is probably an incredibly physically taxing sport. Lots of respect. But I caught the ball right in the middle of the two, they're kind of broken up into maybe, I guess we could say 3 groups. Anyway, in the middle of all of them, right in the middle, you have the ball in the air. And also some nice separation of all the girls from each other, I think really helped out. And then I took some photos on the dock. Here we have a photo of a sailboat with some fishermen in the foreground. Once again, I focused past the humans onto the sailboat. So of course, one could just take a photo of a sailboat, and sailboats make great subjects. They are one of my favorite subjects. When the sails are up, it actually helps as well. But because I included the dock and the fishermen, we have a sense of depth, a sense of energy. It's kind of bustling, there's things happening, and environmental context. Then I have this photo, different scene, similar idea, focus past the person onto the sailboat. Perfectly centered, right? The person is centered with the sailboat, and they're all centered in the frame. And then we have this red splash from the human, which contrasts against the cool tones that are pervasive in this scene. And then I squeezed this monohull in between some foreground elements, and the light on the boat is a big deal for making this photo make sense. For one, it is the brightest point in the scene, and also, once again, we have really warm light, and I'm sure my photo editing had a lot to do with that as well. Contrasted against rather cool tones throughout the rest of the scene, including the clouds in the sky. With those clouds, a scene like this actually runs the risk of being a bit too moody and flat. So having such a bright point of focus in the scene, I think makes the photo a lot stronger. And then we have this one, which I'm very happy with. And I like to call this photo Vices. You got my man smoking a cigarette here, and then you have his dog equally addicted to his ball. In terms of compositional organization, if we look at the masts on the boat in the background, they are on either side of his head. His head is in the middle, and they're not coming out of his head, which would create some distraction. So in this scene, we had a lot of elements that needed to be stacked on top of each other in a way that made sense. And one thing to take note of here is the 2 masts on the boat are on either side of his head as opposed to coming out of his head, which would be distracting. The other thing that helps here is the shallowness of depth of field. The background is out of focus just enough to where it's not clashing with what's happening in the foreground. Our eye knows where to go very naturally, or effortlessly, I think is a good word. The light in this scene is actually a bit awkward because the side of that boat in the background is actually the brightest point. So one thing that really helps here is the color of the dog. The fact that the dog is very bright white. And then the tennis ball, which, white is a rather neutral color. You can kind of throw white anywhere. But the tennis ball is a completely different color than anything else we're seeing in the scene. So it jumps out as well. It's also nice how the fellow here blends in with the water because of his blue attire. thus keeping the color palette simple. If he was wearing something that was loud and distinct from the other colors in the frame, it would muddy up the shot. But because of the way everything's coming together here, I feel like the photo does not feel disjointed, even though it could have been if some of the elements were a little bit different. And then in this one, we have a boat in the foreground close to us, and then in the background, we have some palm trees, and we have a cool and warm contrast happening here once again. And of course, this boat introduces a sense of depth. The background's rather two-dimensional, and that's okay. You can make a perfectly exciting two-dimensional feeling photo. Think about any time that you've experienced a beautiful scene. Your ability to feel the sense of depth of the objects around you is just as important as the shapes, the light, the colors, etc. And also a sense of parallax. This is why shooting video can actually be easier at times when it comes to capturing the feeling of a place, because you have the ability to use motion to move around something, this is how we experience the world, and it's meaningful to experience the world that way versus just a sliver. You can capture a sense of three-dimensionality and parallax in a photo if you're clever. Okay, on to the last couple of photos. This is the same alley where I took those previous photos. Obviously the lighting is much different now. And once again, we have some rather aggressive sub-framing. We have a scene within a scene. I would argue that this photo is much more visually dynamic and exciting than if it was just the boats. But then we have this photo. In this photo, we have a bit less. In this one, we have a bit less of a wacky composition. We have a single boat as a subject as opposed to the two boats in the previous one. I think it's stronger in this case. Also, I used a longer focal length. There's more compression occurring here. And you can see in this one compared to the previous one, see how far the boats felt away in the previous one versus this one. I think everything feels very structured and nice. Pleasant photo in the end. Simple frame? I don't know what that means. Okay, that's it for this one. I hope you found this video to be useful and enjoyable. I would love to hear your thoughts about everything I spoke about here. I'd love to engage with you guys in the comment. There's one comment allowed. I love the Big Island. It was my favorite island of the two that I visited, the other one being Kauai. And even though Kauai had far more chickens, but there's old lava flows everywhere. You get the sense that everything is in action still, right? You don't get that sense with most places. You have black volcanic rock everywhere. The airport is actually built on volcanic rock. You have cliffs. The northwest side, if I'm doing that math correctly, it's basically a jungle. Such a wonderful place, worth the effort to visit if you are on the mainland or any other part of the world. It's a unique place. But more from the Big Island to come. If you like what I'm up to here, please like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I appreciate you guys, and I hope you have a good day.